Photographing an active lifestyle for a portrait client or an advertising client means that you need to put yourself in the right place at the right time and fire off a burst of shutter clicks to capture the moment. Today we're going to create an advertising style image of a serious bicyclist moving in an urban environment with a very strong sense of motion. Now this might sound a little crazy, but the best way to shoot a job like this is to find a location that's quiet and hang out in the back of a truck safely, of course, and have the bicyclist pedal right behind you at the same speed. This moves the camera and the subject and makes you easily have access to blurring that background. Now, the trouble is, I need to get that subject popped off the background, and I'm going to use an on-camera flash or an off-camera flash that's just close enough to the camera to give me that hard, direct, high-impact lighting that shows the expression of the bicyclist's face. Using a traditional speed light for this is out. There is no way you can recycle fast enough to keep up, and it's probably going to overheat because of the amount of shots we're going to need to shoot, and it's just going to make me frustrated. Sure, we could load up the truck with really expensive battery-powered studio flashes that you've seen me before, but most photographers don't have the luxury for that kind of setup. So in between a traditional speed light and a studio setup is the right tool for the job, Q-Flash. And even the least expensive Q-Flash will do the trick for this job. Let's head over to the studio and I'll show you exactly how we're going to get set up.
The Q-Flash system from Quantum is powerful, portable, and makes great lighting simple.
I know the right location to shoot this. It's the big convention center here in Chicago, and the architecture is perfect for what we need for the feel of the background. I'll use my truck to shoot from, and I've chosen to use a Nikon D7000 to shoot because it's a little smaller and lighter than the bigger Nikons that I typically use. And you know what? It'll do a fine job for this. But hey, the brand of camera here really doesn't matter. Use whatever camera you have that's compatible with the Q-Flash. And for flash, it's an easy choice for this job. I want to go with an on-camera flash, and I'll need to fire it really fast. So the Quantum Q-Flash Trio is the obvious choice. And let's use the Trio Basic Flash. Now that's the same flash as the regular Trio, but it does not have the built-in FreeX wire radio triggering system in it, and it's a little less expensive. So let's connect up a Trio Basic to a Nikon D7000 that's fitted with a 24 to 70 millimeter f2.8 zoom, and it's set up to shoot in manual exposure mode on the camera. And here's where we need to be careful with our turbo battery choices. Now I use 3 different turbos in my work here in my studio for my photo work depending on the job, and this is where we need the fastest recycle time possible and the maximum power capacity we can get, so we're going to go with the Turbo 3. This will recycle the Trio and the Trio Basic and any other Q-Flash faster than any of the other turbos. Next, we want to use the rear curtain sync feature on our camera that will allow us to fire the flash at the end of the exposure. If you're not comfortable with that, let me show you what I mean. If we have our camera set up for a typical flash photography, and let's say just for this exercise, we're using a 2-second shutter speed. Watch this. When we hit the shutter release, the flash fires, and the shutter stays open for a full 2 seconds. Now this is going to make a big mess out of this bicycle shot because we need the background to blur first, then the flash to fire last to make the shot work. So we're going to change the camera to work in what's called rear curtain sync flash mode. Now it's not a big deal. It's very easy to do. We'll flip it over according to your instruction manual. Then we'll fire the shutter, and the flash fires at the end of the exposure. That's what we need. Speaking of exposures, I want to shoot fast, so TTL exposure is out. Why? Well, that small pre-flash that the TTL system uses to calculate light and exposure values before the primary flash fires will take a small amount of time for the camera to process. And not that it's any big deal, but it could mean the difference between a burst of, say, 4 shots that I really like versus a burst of 6 shots that I really like if I were to use a different exposure mode on the flash, like auto or autofill or manual exposure mode instead. Now, I've relied on the Quantum auto fill modes in the past for shots like this, and it will let me use a darker, more underexposed background and carefully pop the flash off the subject with just the right exposure that combines available light on the subject as well as flash on the subject too. The combination of the flash and the available in the auto fill mode gives me a little creative tool that I can work with too, as well as letting me shoot nice and quick. So let's start out in auto fill exposure mode on the Trio Basic, and we'll calculate the settings once we get on the location. Autofill also makes use of one of the great features of the Q-Flash. It's called sensor limit, and we want the Trio to concentrate its exposures on our subject, not the background for the shot, right? So we'll tell the sensor right here that gathers up the light for the auto and the autofill mode to not worry about the background. Instead, have it work on delivering nice exposures for our subject with the flash as well as the available light. How do we do that? Oh, it's easy. We power up the flash by pressing the power button on the turbo. Then we'll set the Trio's exposure mode by pressing mode. Then the left or right arrows to scroll through to auto fill mode. Next, let's use the sensor limit to tell the Trio that we want it to deliver its exposure on the subject, not the background. And she'll be riding her bicycle, no further away than 14 or 15 feet. So the sensor needs to know that it's going to ignore anything past 15 feet. So press the Option soft key and the sensor limit soft key and press it 2 more times to 15 feet. This tells the exposure sensor to collect the info from flash and available light between the camera and 15 feet and ignore everything past 15 feet. This is one of those features that you really want to use a Q-Flash for, and I've been doing this for years with this particular setup. Now, you know what? Enough talking. Let's go make some pictures. What could be more fun than hanging out the back of a truck making some great flash pictures? Here I'm going to be adjusting my aperture and my shutter speed setting depending on which side of the street I'm on. You'll see here I'm on the shady side of the street, and in just a little second you'll see me over to the sunny side. I want to adjust my shutter speed so the blur of the background changes. And you know what also changes the blur of the background? Of course, the speed that the truck's moving, as well as my focal length of my lens. I'm using a zoom lens there. If I zoom out to a wider lens, it doesn't see as much of the background moving as it does when I zoom in tighter. So the tighter I zoom, you'll see in a shot like there, the background is more blurry at between a 1/10 and a 15th of a second shutter speed. Now you're seeing the actual JPEGs that are coming out of the camera here, and you'll see how much value that flash gives us. And it's in auto fill mode, which is going to blend the available light with the flash. And now when we're turning the corner, you'll see we're on the sunny side of the street. Nice. Well now done. our flash Right becomes there. a fill flash. I did stop down my aperture 2 stops, and I'm a little bit overexposed here, but my Q-Flash is filling in all those shadows. Take a look at those shadows behind her eyeglasses, and you'll see that that shadow value is being filled perfectly by the Q-Flash that's firing every time, of course, nice and fast. Now this looks like the truck's moving a little faster than it really was because that's a very wide angle lens on the video camera. But we maintain the same speed, or as close to the same speed as possible for the entire shoot. Excellent. All right. I am so glad we did location scouting for this particular shoot before the day of the photo session, because I learned where the sun position was going to be, and it helped out a lot. We knew that we were going to have a sunny side of the street and a shady side of the street, and the darker shady side of the street is pretty much where I wanted to make the shot. But as long as that sunny side looked kind of cool, I wanted to use the ability of the auto fill mode from my Trio Basic to make a shot over on the sunny side too. So I got a series of really nice looking images, varying the power and varying my color. Remember, we did some black and white that I'm just dying to show you. So first up, let's take a look at what it looks like if we didn't use any flash at all. Here's the shady side of the street with a bit of an underexposure, right? We used manual exposure mode on our camera and autofill exposure mode on our Q flash. And the camera was set for an underexposure of about 1.5 stops. That's why this image looks so dark. Then when we pop off a Q flash set to no exposure compensation, it gives us this beautiful balanced photograph. And look how nice, right? You saw in the video how fast we were able to shoot those shots, and I did use autofocus, so shooting was actually pretty easy. Our first shot here is good, not great. You'll notice the background doesn't have a lot of blur and it doesn't have a very nice sense of motion. That's what I'm kind of going for in this shot. So I zoomed in a little bit to make this shot and dropped the shutter speed down just a little bit. Now you'll see that that gives me some pretty good looking flash to ambient light ratio basis on the shady side of the street. But what happens when we go to the sunny side? Well, when we're sneaking on over there, I've got to correct my camera, don't I? Well, when we go into that sunny side, I just stopped my aperture down 2 stops. So I landed on f16 and let the Q flash take over. And look what I got. Here is the sunny side of the street, 2 stops down, letting my autofill mode just work at its 0 exposure compensation and delivered really terrific looking fill flash. I don't quite have the impact that I did on the other side of the street, but still very nice. Now, I decided that I wanted more impact, so as we made that U-turn over to the shady side of the street, I brought up the exposure compensation on my autofill mode to a +1 stop. And look at how much more flash I get. Snappy, right? So I've got the background as dark as I want to and blurred as much as I want to, and I've got that wonderful snap off here. This allowed me to get my first bingo shot. Check it out. She's looking over at me, very confident. Remember, she's a personal trainer and wants these images for her promo. I darken the corners a little bit in Lightroom, and I'm very happy with this shot. Also in this same sequence, we had a lot of motion going on. Wayne was speeding up the truck a little bit there, and I got this shot too. I liked a lot of determination in her face in that. Pretty cool, right? Well, when we did another U-turn and went over to the sunny side of the street, that's when I've got to stop down my aperture setting, but on the second pass, I forgot. So that's a 2-stop overexposure. Did I get any shots that were worth keeping? And remember, I do shoot in JPEG mode. I did. Check it out. Here is an overexposed shot. I saved a little bit in Lightroom, but my Q flash is giving me the fill flash I need to open up that shadow value, and look at the energy and motion that this shot provides. I really like this shot. Next up, we wanted to go to black and white. Now, I know we could easily shoot color JPEGs and convert them later, or shoot raw files and convert them into black and white, but you know what I like to do? Shoot everything in the camera so I kind of get the feel and the sense of the image that we're creating. So I flipped that camera over into black and white mode, and I wanted to have all that punch from, remember we're at +1 on our exposure compensation for our autofill mode? I want to keep it that way. When I shoot an environment that I typically go into black and white and it's got people in there, I do like that higher contrast level. I do like that brighter flash to snap the subject off the background. And in this setup, no difference. I still have the blur going on with a slow shutter speed, but we did modify the black and white, actually monochrome inside that camera setting, so that it had a little more sharpness and a little more contrast. And what did it get me? Boom, check that out. We changed Kristen's glasses so she has the white bar that you see there, and we've got lots of impact. I did darken the corners once again in Lightroom, but you'll see now we're focusing in on her face. She's starting to break a sweat. We're seeing all that triathlete inside her come out. I love it. And you want to see one of my favorite shots of the entire week? Check it out. I cropped it square. I love the shape. I love the intensity. That is, for me, the perfect amount of fill flash. That's over on the sunny side of the street. My flash is popping right inside there to open everything up for me, and I've got so much interest in there. But want to see the real super winner shot? Yeah, check this out. That space that you see there between her face and her hands is where her logo is going to go, and this is going to be a perfect marketing image for her website. So we have a wonderful collection of color photographs as well as black and white photographs that we can crop into whatever she needs them for, and they do come across with a really adventurous and action-oriented image. We could not have shot this with lesser equipment. This job called for us to use the Q-Flash gear, and it did a great job. See if you can use the same setups I did and make even better pictures with your Q-Flash.
There's plenty more great Q-Flash video tips from Will Crockett, as well as other top photographers, available for you free of charge at QTM.com.